Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Women in Computer Science panel discussion. It's a really great honor for me today to have very successful women from industry, from academia and industrial research. I think this is a great opportunity to have to get very different perspectives about women in computer science. And before starting our session, I just wanted to read a few words from the Aboriginal activist group in Queensland, where I live in Australia. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound to mine, then let us work together. So I just wanted to emphasize that improving women's situation in computer science is beneficial to everyone. And that's why we are all here to help each other. And also men are most welcome to participate because at the end of the day, this is a problem for everyone and not just women. And I really hope that men also feel very belonged here in our panel discussion. Okay, so let's start with very quick introductions of ourselves. I'm Benaz. I'm from Iran. Salam. I am a senior researcher at Oracle Labs in Australia. I received my PhD about 4 years ago from National University of Singapore in the area of program analysis and security. So I will ask Alina to go next.
Thank you very much, Benaz. So my name's Alina Griffiths. I completed my undergraduate work at the University of Queensland in 1993 and commenced a PhD in formal methods at the Software Verification Research Centre, which was part of Queensland Uni. I submitted my PhD in 1997 and I graduated in 1998, and I now work in private industry. So together with a business partner, I own and run a modest size engineering consultancy. We look at safety critical software mostly in the rail industry, but we also do some work in air traffic management and other adjacent fields. Thanks.
Okay, maybe Sukyeon can go next.
안녕하세요. I'm Seokyeong Ryu. I grew up in Seoul and I'm Asian. I used to work in Boston and now I'm back in Korea. I got my degrees from KAIST in Korea. I worked at Harvard University and then Sun Microsystems for 5 years and came back to KAIST. I met Christina in Boston. We used to work at Sun Microsystems together, and I will be the general chair of ICFP2021 next year. I hope to see you everyone next year.
Great, and Cristina.
Yeah. Hola, my name is Cristina Cifuentes, and I grew up in Colombia. I'm Latina. And I migrated to Australia with my family more than 30 years ago, so I now call Australia home. I did my PhD here in Australia. I worked in academia for 5 years, and then I went to the US to Sun Microsystems Research Lab on sabbatical leave. I ended up staying and met Sukyeong there. I had met Alina previously at the University of Queensland. And when I came back to Australia, I continued working on industrial research. So I have been in the industry for 21 years. And I have also served, as mentor for a lot of programming for little kids. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions first, and then I will read the questions from chat, basically, and ask our panelists to give answers. So let's start with a difficult question first. So in the beginning, I want to talk about an important topic for anyone basically that is pursuing any career, and that is failure. I think in order to be successful, we need to really be comfortable and familiar with failure first. What I have noticed, especially in very young PhD students that are in the beginning of their journey, they experience lots of anxiety when they want to try out a new idea, start a project, that they might fail. And they might not even, start that project, or they might not apply for an internship, and they might not apply for a particular job. So I think if we get to know what a failure means and be okay with it, it might be an empowering step towards basically taking up challenges. And I wanted to first ask Christina whether she agrees with me or not, and whether she has had an experience during her career where a project has failed, and then what happened afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the biggest failure, I would say, I thought of it at the time, was when back in 2000, I had moved to the US. My husband had relocated and everything. And you would remember 2000 was the dot-com crash. And I was working at Sun Microsystems in the research lab. And they decided to cut down on projects. And my project was one of the projects that was cut down. That was work on binary translation. So at the time, I was one of the new ones. I had only been there for 1 year. Project gets shut down, and you learn a lot of things, right? It was, for me, it was a way of actually learning how support from other people is really needed at all different levels. It's not just your manager and their higher management chain. It's also support from all of the other organizations that you work with, from researchers, from developers. So one of the biggest lessons for me was don't only focus on a subset of the people that really need to support you. You really need like wider type of support overall.
That's a great, I think, lesson that you have learned, to build a community and people who will basically tap on your shoulder and give you confidence to move forward. And I believe that life didn't end after that failure. I can see you, you have achieved a lot afterwards. So that's great, actually.
Yeah, and each new project, I try out something different. But I always remember this one failure was very important for me because it was early in my industrial research career.
That's true. Sukyan, what do you think about failure?
Right. So that reminds me of like the same time. I got my PhD in 2001, and I gave two births in 2002 and 2004. Like right after getting PhD, two little kids and new life in Boston and Harvard University for 3 years. I was like, wow, there are so many things going on, and I need to do all the work, and wow, it was so overwhelming. And I was even thinking about quitting work. Like, I could take care of 2 kids, that's it, even after PhD, But after 3 years of working at Harvard, I got this announcement about new job posting as a postdoc. Even though I was a researcher at that time, it was for a postdoc working with Guy Steele, a new programming language that's really crazily new thing. It was like, wow, I need to do this. So I forgot about what I've done by then. I just went for that, got the job, and that was my love And I really liked it. I learned a lot. So what I found is that even though I feel like I may not be good enough to do this job, but if it's the work that I love, I really loved designing a new language for scientists and engineers, and learned a lot from my colleagues, and that just helped me a lot.
Wow, that's a very interesting story as well. And I liked how you persevered, basically, and you didn't give up with all those, difficulties that you had faced in the beginning. Alina, what do you think?
Well, I will say that the failures I've had in my career have certainly been the most formative experiences. You remember them a lot longer than you remember your successes. So yeah, I guess that's probably true for all of us. But yeah, I can tell you about very early in my career, after I'd left the research centre where I did my PhD and ventured out into the brave new world of engineering railway systems for companies. I was sent on a mission to the United Kingdom, to England, where the company I was working for was putting in a new safety system over there. And I was having a look at how they were proposing to approach it. And I said, oh, that's not right. You can't do it that way. That's not safe. And anyway, needless to say, that message was not very well received in certain quarters. And certain people told me in no uncertain terms that I should keep my opinions to myself. And as a young, newly minted PhD, full of verve and vigor to do the right thing, I insisted on standing my ground and did so in a rather undiplomatic fashion. Needless to say, got put on a plane home to Australia, and where I proceeded to lick my wounds. But while I suppose I was ultimately vindicated a few years later when they did find out they needed to rebuild a part of the system, I think I still view it as a failure, because a better person would have found a more diplomatic way to get the message across and would have been a better communicator. And so I think that was quite formative in my career, when I learned that it's not just enough to be right. You also need to be an effective communicator if you're going to be able to do the things you want to do, I suppose. But it was a pretty upsetting and brutal experience at the time. So I still wake up in the middle of the night some more than 20 years later thinking about that one. Yeah.
And how did it feel right afterwards? I'm curious what sort of challenges you had to overcome, and what really helped you to move on?
Oh, I mean, the main thing was, so the support of the people I worked with immediately back in Australia, who, I mean, they'd sent me over there as a specialist advisor, but they were quite supportive of the position I'd taken, and they were older and wiser than me in the ways of the world, and said, okay, well, we've done our bit. We've explained how things need to work. It's up to them now. And they moved me on to another project where I quite happily soldiered on. So, yeah, I think it's the support of others around you, those who say, well, I believe in you, even if somebody else doesn't. So, yeah, I think that's what helped me to deal with it in the short term. And longer term, I just chalk it up as another one of those things it's fun to tell stories about later on. So.
That's true. Indeed, these things become fun stories to tell afterwards in a couple of years.
Yes.
But at that moment, it can be really hard to deal with. Okay, my next question is basically about the circumstances where we are in the minority, whether it's because of our nationality, our gender, and we end up in a group, in a team, in a lab, and we feel a bit different from others. So I want to actually ask Sukyoung now to tell us if you have had such an experience in your career, and what helped you, if yes, what helps you to remain authentic and understand your individualistic capabilities and use them basically to help the team, the project, in an effective way.
Right. Again, that's the Fortress team. The team that I loved and the language that we developed is called the Fortress. So I was the last one to join the team, and there were 6 people already, and they talk a lot. And when we have weekly meetings, like they talk a lot for 2 hours, and I was like, wow, what's going on? And for 1 month, after those 2 hours meeting, they have email exchanges all day, discussing things, and wow, it was just really tough 1 month. But after 1 month, like after 4 to 5 meetings, I realized that they are discussing over same issues over and over again, and there are not that many decisions made. And I was like, okay. And I volunteered, like, can I be moderator for these meetings? I'm gonna keep the list of questions that we're gonna discuss this week. I'm gonna write it down. I may not understand everything, so I could be wrong. You guys can just correct me. So in the beginning, I was the least in the team, but at the end, like in 5 years, when I left Sun to Korea, one of my best friends there, he was like, oh, when you go, who's gonna take care of us? So it started from serving and doing some minutes for the team, but as time goes by, I could understand the big picture and I could kind of help the team to make progress. So it was a really fun experience for me and for the team, and we had really good, progress there.
So from what you just said, it was a perfect example of one person understanding himself or herself, and then by knowing what unique gifts you are, you actually, instead of fitting in and looking like all other people and perhaps just contributing to those endless discussions that would go nowhere, you understood that you are a negotiator and you could actually help. So you took the risk, you stepped forward and brought in your unique capability. Right. That was a very interesting
Right. So
story.
that's kind of a really big lesson to me. So now that I came back to Korea, KAIST, this is my mother school. So my colleagues are my teachers that I learned from them. So it was not that easy in the beginning, but I used that experience again. I volunteered to do some work, and now I'm kind of taking a lead on many things, especially for students, and taking care of minority in KAIST. So yeah, that was my asset from Sun Microsystems.
Very great story. Christina, do you have something to share with us as well?
Sure. So I grew up in Colombia, right? And when I was doing computer science over there, there were a lot of people, like I was not a minority, right? Everyone was Latino, and it was like 50-50 ratio between males and females in computer science in the engineering faculty. So when I came to Australia, that's the first time that I actually realized that there was a difference. I was now minority in 2 different ways. And, it kind of wasn't an issue, perhaps because I had already studying elsewhere. But I knew that, computer science was something that I really, really enjoyed, as well as maths, of course. And throughout the years, it was mainly like just doing what I believe makes sense, and then just continuing moving forward to, like the next project and so on.
So what helped you basically to be authentic to yourself during those moments where you would feel like, maybe I don't belong here, like everyone is different from me, I'm Latino? I would like to know what helped you in those situations.
I think it's just like belief in yourself, at least in my case, because I have been in many situations where, of course, like I'm the only woman, or I'm the only Latino. I'm also short, which doesn't help in some other circumstances. Yeah, but at the end, it's just believing in yourself. You know, we're all people at the end of the day, and where we're working, we're just working based on our intellect, and that's what's important.
That's true. Alina, do you have also something to add and share, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess in the early part of my career, I was pretty much always the only woman in the room. And I was also typically the youngest in the room by at least 10 years. The reason is that I was, there providing advice on software safety and software verification. And usually that's the thing right at the end. The reason you can't put a system into service is because there's still software bugs, and your verification people, who was me, are telling you, no, it's not safe to deploy. And so I would end up in meetings with people much senior than me and have to explain why, the nature of a technical software problem or something like that. And of course, it was always news they didn't want to hear. So it was sort of a doubly unpleasant situation from that perspective. Of course, most professional engineers, senior engineers who care about the quality of the product, overwhelmingly, they'd be grateful to have that you've discovered those problems before they go out in the field, and then the users have to discover them. But along the way, obviously, you do tend to get a little bit of backlash, if you like, from those who might think you're being overly critical or whatnot. With the fact of being the only woman in those forums and being considerably younger, there were times when I did feel at a real disadvantage. I guess over time you sort of get used to that, and I think you build a working rapport. When you first meet people, things like, the color of our skin or our gender or our height or whatever are often the first things you mentally note. But once you've known a person and worked with them for a short period of time, I think those things become irrelevant. As Christina said, I think it was just gritting my teeth, trying to believe in myself in the early days, and really toughing it out. But yeah, there were times when it was quite hard, but I'm sort of glad I stuck it out.
Wow. Great stories and lessons to learn from your experience, indeed. I want to ask one more question because it's important for me to talk about it, and then I will move on to the questions from the audience. As women, not necessarily only in computer science, but I believe in all fields, when we decide to start a family or have kids, there are so many challenges still, unfortunately, in our society that lead us to sometimes even leave our career. That's again very unfortunate, but it's something that is true, and we need to talk about it, and we need to basically, as women, perhaps like you, I'm really happy and glad to talk to the three of you because you all have kids. We need to share the decisions that we have made that has helped us to not only remain in the field, but get to senior positions. Like all of you guys are in very senior positions, and you have made lots of amazing progress in your career. So I would like to know what sorts of strategies would you basically recommend to young women regarding work-life balance? Maybe Christina, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So I think for myself, it was always very important. I knew this, like even when I finished high school, that it was important to find a good partner, someone that was going to treat you as equal, right? And part of the thinking, is related to some of the friends that I had back in Colombia. But in Colombia, your surname, like once you get married, they add like de such and such. So you belong to is what it means in English, right? And we were always like conceptually opposed to that idea, because you really don't belong to someone else. You're a partner. You need that partnership. And so for me, it was very important, find like the right partner, so that then, you know, like your life is going to be easier, you know, someone that is happy to do some of the cooking, washing, you know, just like you do it as well. Someone that is going to go and change the nappies, pick up the baby in the middle of the night, and do all of those things, right? And, you know, my career has been furthered because of the support from my husband. We've traveled to Tasmania, you know, we relocated to Tasmania, relocated back to Queensland, relocated to the US, and we finally came back to Australia at that time. So very important, I think.
Okay, so Christina's recommendation is a good partner. Sukyung, do you have any other different recommendation apart from
to begin with, having a good partner is the most important thing. So I cannot skip it. So that's done. And the second thing is that I think it's select and focus. So I love my work, and it requires lots of time and energy. So I gave up cooking. So yeah, and my kids were happy with that, because even though I do cooking, that's not really good, so they don't really miss that. So selecting important things and focus on those things was giving me more time to work on that. And another thing is that know myself. I know that I cannot do work that I don't like. I cannot keep up with that. So I just chose to find a work that I love. If I like it, I don't need to eat, or I don't need to sleep. So finding the work that I love. And there was a question in the chat asking what made me move from industry to academia. That was the number one thing is students. When I was researching Sun Microsystems, we had these summer internships. For 3 months, we had like 2 to 6 graduate students. I really liked it. I love to see those students started from knowing nothing to be an independent researcher. That made my heart, jumping. So that made me to come back to KAIST. And another question was, how hard was it, and how did we build up this strong profile? That's on related question is that I get these similar questions from even my colleagues. Like, my students are really talented and they are really motivated, and my colleagues were asking, like, how did you get them? How did you get those talented students? The main secret is that I spend lots of time and energy in my teaching. I teach programming language course. That's a mandatory course. And that's one of the most important things to me. Then good students come to me because they got hooked by the course. And they see that when I teach or when I speak about my research, I'm so happy, and so I was so excited, so they could see that. And I think that's the main thing for me.
That's very interesting. So if I can summarize first, you're recommending to create space, because we can't do everything, right? That's impossible. And that's usually the tendency of women to do everything. Like being a good wife, being a good mother, being a good researcher, perfect activist, everything. No, it's not possible. So, and then your second recommendation is that now that you know you can't do everything, do the things that you love, right? That's really great advice. Alina, do you have something to add?
Only to echo the ideas expressed by my colleagues. I think acknowledge that you can't do everything. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So I quite freely admit that I would not have been able to do some of the things I've been fortunate enough to do without the help. In my case, it was my mother. So my husband, who was also an excellent partner, but unfortunately travelled extensively with his work, so was often absent. But my mother was available to help with the children to some extent, which was just fantastic. I would not have managed without her. And it was after a few years of trying to do everything, I made some tough decisions and decided to outsource the housework and things like that, to focus on the things I love, which is not vacuuming the floor. And I think the other thing I'd say, though, is that the experience of trying to juggle a lot of balls is actually an invaluable one. So I found that after I had children, I became so much more efficient. I think it started when my daughter was born, and about 11 weeks later, I started going back to work, and I would drop her at childcare, drive half an hour to work, do 3 hours of work, drive half an hour back, pick her up because I needed to breastfeed her then. And that was how I managed to keep feeding. So I would, but while I was there for those 3 hours at work, I was in the zone. You know, nobody could disturb me. And so, yeah, you become, I think, a lot more efficient and a lot better at context switching. So, you know, on the one hand, I was talking about test programs or static analysis of software at work, and then I'd turn around and be talking about whether my daughter had slept or what her toilet habits had been and feeding her. So, yeah, I mean, I think you do become a different person when you sort of take that next step and become a mum, but it's certainly one that I think made me a better person as well.
That's, again, very great. So you're recommending to first get help. Don't be afraid to get help. And I think that's a very important point, actually, because what I've noticed that our society is pushing us more and more towards being independent, and almost it's a taboo to ask for help from other people. And that's a great point, I think, to think about. And that's also very interesting to me that you actually became more efficient. That's very interesting after having kids. Okay. I think it would be great if the audience ask questions if they have. I saw one question from Sukyang that she has already answered in the chat, but I think that was an interesting question. Basically, the question is, when you were performing in the role of the facilitator, right, back at Sun Labs, so didn't you feel like, oh, now I'm seen as a facilitator and my basically technical skills are not appreciated as much? I think that's a great question. So can you perhaps answer again?
Yeah, sure. So I answered that to the chat, but just briefly answer that again. So I think it's highly likely that you're gonna feel that way, because okay, they are treating me as a negotiator or a facilitator because my technical skills are not really good. That could be really possible thinking from your heart, but I mean, that happened to me also. But what I knew that was, number one, my teammates were really good from the beginning. They were really nice people. And when we talk, as I said, they talk a lot all day long about various issues like technical things and how to implement this, which programming language is better, or Camel or Scala, Java, why do you use C, and those things. If you talk that much, it's really difficult to hide your technical skills. So I knew that they knew that my technical skills are good. Again, my technical skills were not good in the beginning because I was new to the field, I mean, the project. But it took some time, and they were really kind and nice to teach me and give me pointers to learn more things. And again, did I say that? I studied and worked a lot. My kids were like 2 and 4 years old, and my husband was injured for various sports all the time. And I put them sleep by 10 p.m. And from 10 p.m. to whatever time, that's my time, my healing time with coding and all the work. So that was how I did it.
Thanks a lot, Sukyang. I think there was one more question from Sukyang, but you have already answered as part of the previous questions. So I will ask another question. about PhD degrees. So I think degrees in general are very, like, it's a controversial topic, whether a degree is really important or not, especially a PhD degree. And I really, I'm glad that we have the three panelists from industry, academia, and industrial research. And also you have seen many people during your career, basically taking up different positions. So I want to know your opinion about the importance of PhD degree. And also basically, how has this degree really helped you in particular? Maybe Alina, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm perhaps a little different from Christina and Soo Kyung in that for me, having the PhD is not essential for the job that I do. I mean, obviously, I'm able to do it better because of having the PhD, but there's plenty of people in engineering consulting who don't have PhDs. But nonetheless, I never actually regret getting it. I mean, I acquired the PhD because for a long time there, I did have aspirations for a career in academia, but over time I sort of decided it wasn't for me. But yeah, I'm never sorry that I spent the time to get it. My PhD years were some of the best in my life. I remember waking up every morning just being desperately interested in the work I was doing, and time has no meaning when you're trying to solve a particular problem. So that was very exciting. But yeah, later on in life though, I think it does demonstrate that you're capable of wrestling a problem for a long period and ultimately delivering something that's large, which requires a certain, let's say, strength of character. You need to be persistent, one who doesn't give up easily. So that's good. And I will say it's also been useful at times to have a non-gender specific title. So it's nice to be able to refer to oneself as Dr. Griffiths on occasion. So that's been useful too.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
So now that we have questions on the chat, maybe
yeah.
Do you?
Okay. If you don't have anything to add, I can move to the questions in the chat, perhaps. Okay, we can always come back to this question later as well. So we have a question from Jennifer about your experience about sexism in different environments. So basically, she's wondering about the difference between an academic environment and an industrial environment. And how do you identify basically an environment to be toxic and an environment to be positive and nourishing? So I think, Christina, do you want to answer? Because you have had experience in both.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking, about the differences. And I have to say that I have found that in the places where I've worked at, we've been very lucky that they've always had a focus of being supportive. I don't know if that's specific to industrial research or not, but certainly, some of the prejudice that, like people mention in other industries, I myself have not seen in the work that I've done in industrial research, neither in academia when I was there. So in terms of identifying, like a positive environment, like for me, it's like being able to have people that are going to support you, not allowing, like offensive materials to be posted, derogative type of comments, this type of thing, which, like in most places, this is very common these days.
Right. Alina, do you agree? Or have you had the same experience or not in industry?
Oh, look, industry has changed dramatically. So I think, you know, when after I submitted my PhD, I kept working at the research lab for about another 6 months or so. But then when I went out into an engineering firm, the culture was vastly different then, and there were aspects of the culture that were completely unacceptable by modern standards today. But I think, so yeah, the culture was different. I think the main thing also was in academia, while there may have been you know, there were more men than women, certainly in computer science and maths, which was what I was doing. That said, it's a meritocracy to some extent. So, I mean, if you've got a PhD, you've got a PhD, right? And people will give you a certain level of respect for that, regardless of your gender or any other things. Obviously, in industry, they weren't the least bit impressed with the PhD. So I didn't sort of have that weapon. But I think that was just a sign of the times, honestly. And now, you know, well over 20 years later, it's much different. And I'm pleased to say, you know, my daughter's in second year university now studying engineering and does some work experience in different places. And her experience is just completely different from mine. And I'm really pleased that that's the case. So I just, try to make things different and better for the next generation to come.
So let me add things briefly. So as Alina said, the condition and the environment have changed drastically. And especially for the industry, they have really good training systems, like, you know, good materials and things like that. In academia, I think it's different from, it's different from different countries. In the Asian culture, there's some, some different culture, but it's still changing, and it's changing a lot. I'm serving as the head of this social inclusion committee at KAIST. In other words, in other universities, we call them diversity committee. I know that in US, there are many diversity committees in most universities, but in Korea, we have only 3 schools that have diversity committee. And we are trying to, you know, advertise that and trying to convince other faculties in universities to have that, so that people in need or minority or in some troubles, they can go ask help to there. So we need this effort, and I'm not really good at this, but I think that's what we need to do to make this change. So it's not yet there, but it's making progress. One last thing to add is that it's not like those people are bad. They're just ignorant. They don't know. We need to teach them how to be nice to people and how to be inclusive. So instead of fighting or blaming those things, our approach is to kind of talk with them and share the experiences.
Yes, and I think you're very right. And I'm remembering what you basically explained in the beginning of your experience joining a group. You were the youngest and the most junior, and you didn't know as much as the others. So it's very, it's very possible that we join a team and we don't know as much as the others, right? But whether the other people should, like how they should behave, I think one maybe thing that we can try is to first ask for help. That also came up during our questions. Ask for mentorship. In a positive and non-toxic environment, I'm pretty sure that the other people, especially men, will help. They come and mentor us. So we don't need to pretend we know everything. We can be very authentic and say, okay, I don't know and I need mentorship. And I think it's also something that we as women need to do, to step forward, accept the things that we don't know as much and ask for help. Okay, there is one more question from Daria. So for those who want to basically apply for a PhD, right? for a PhD program. They're wondering, what should they know before doing that? Like, what would be your recommendation? So if you go back to your younger self and you wanted to start doing the PhD, what would be your advice? Who wants to answer? Maybe Christina? Do you have something to share?
Yeah, I was thinking back. I think like with the PhD, well, I guess for me, like it was the interest in being able to solve like a new challenge, right? A new type of area that initially was not well known. That was the area of decompilation back then when I did my PhD. And, you know, like the PhD program here in Australia is a little bit different to the one in the US. So here in Australia, you end up doing your PhD for 3.5 years. So like you do a deep dive directly into the studies, like the subject area that you're going to be focusing on. I know in the US, there's some other subjects that you have to take and exams and so on. So it tends to be a little bit longer. But I think for the type of PhD program that we do here in Australia, you know, like it was always very clear what needed to be done, right? Like you're embarking in a new area. You kind of have like the first year to really figure out what in that area you're going to be working on, and then be able to do the work, submit, you know, papers to the different conferences and so on. And I think for myself, the submitting of papers was a little bit hard in that I used to see, you know, like some of the other people in my lab would get their papers accepted. Mine were not being accepted. And I thought like, oh, this is like demoralizing, like to a certain extent. However, you pursue and you try and understand like, why is that the case? And what I learned, you know, the topic that I was working on was very, very new. And so people were skeptical about the topic itself being decompilation. Fast forward 20 years later, and now these days, lots of people work in that area. And if I was submitting papers right now, it would be completely different. But it was new and it was breaking type of work back then.
That's very interesting. We are getting a couple of interesting questions. One of them that is quite different from the others that I want to make sure, given the time that I ask is, so we now see a lot of, you know, rules of diversity and, you know, inclusions, especially for hiring, that there are certain quotas and like you have to hire a woman, otherwise you can move forward. So what is your opinion about such rules, and how would that really help women in the long run? Maybe Alina, do you want to start?
Yeah, so that's a reasonably, obviously, political question, the old affirmative action, whether that works or not. I think there's a place, my personal belief is there is a place for affirmative action. I think having seen more diversity in the workplace, and I'm not just referring to men and women, but also to different ethnicities and also, you know, different gender, well, you know, sexualities and things like that. I think that the workplace is richer for it. I think the outputs are better for it. And I think it's a lot easier for young women and men, if you like, to dream big dreams if they see there's not a particular mold one needs to fit to actually have a senior position, whether it be in industry or in academia. So, you know, provided quality standards are maintained, I am not opposed to affirmative action at all. So, you know, affirmative action being when all things are equal, then you would favour you know, one person over another with the goal of diversity in mind. But obviously, if things aren't equal, I don't think it does anybody any good to be promoting, you know, less experienced or less capable persons into high positions. But I mean, we can see in all sorts of areas where affirmative action has been pursued, you know, 10 or 20 years later, it's a far more diverse, you know, professional cohort than it is when people eschew affirmative action. So that's my 2 cents worth. I know there's multiple schools of thought on that, but I'm certainly a believer.
That's interesting. And so I think this is a very complicated question, and there might not be really a yes or no answer, really, because, you know, how do we define a competent employee, right? Like when we get applications, right? How would we say that we have really hired the right person? Maybe the criteria that we are considering for our hiring process are not good enough. And therefore, a woman might not be chosen, but if she was in the team, if we were not just strict with our criteria and we wanted to have a diversity in our team, just having a woman, and for example, I'm again remembering what Sukhian said as her negotiating, you know, capabilities. If we include that person, maybe things start changing. So I think it's also very important to maybe revisit our criteria of who is a good person to hire or not. And if someone else wants to add anything to this point, it's a very important, I think, topic. Maybe Christina, you are hiring a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think sorry. I think for ourselves, you know, I agree, like with Alina's, like affirmative action is good that it exists. Apologies. It's good that it exists because it's raised awareness, right? Now, following exactly to the rule that there's a quota and therefore you can only hire women or someone else in certain positions, that makes it hard. And in some cases, you know, like if for example, there's a position where like this one is only advertised for a female person, then they get told like you got the job just because you're a woman, and certainly you don't want to be in that type of scenario, right? So I think it's like a process that has to change like over time. It is changing, definitely. Say, for example, like myself, like being like the lead in our team, and we're much more aware of some of the differences. And, you know, Benas, you know that our team is very diverse in terms of country of origin, in terms of gender, age differences, right? So I think, you know, like that awareness, once there is someone that can raise that awareness, it just makes for more changes to be possible in the whole environment. And so little by little, we start seeing it more and more in all other companies as well.
Okay. There was one question, I think this might be the last question, about, again, work-life balance. So what if we basically, if we want to prioritize our personal goals that are not work-related, we lose in the career, and we lose something in our career, basically life, right? So what would be your recommendations for that? How can we maintain such balance and be happy as a person, but also flourish in our career? Sukhian, do you want to say something?
So I'm not sure what kind of personal goals that the question refers to. To me, my personal goal is to have good health. I mean, say, making a record for my running or Pilates. I can do more positions in my Pilates and things like that. I also like singing. I'd like to take some lessons about singing, but that's too much of my time. So let's focus on those two things, singing and sports. I want to do singing, but that requires more time. But for sports, I can do that, like home training and things like that. And I do that personally, I mean, intentionally. That's not only for my personal happiness, that also improves the productivity of my career, my work, because we are not machines. I sometimes tell myself, like, I'm not a machine. I need break. I need weekend, because if I don't think that way, I don't have any weekends and nights and sleep. So by finding those time, I feel like I lack some time to work on my work to do, but still I feel better. And yeah, that just gave me a positive feedback to my work. But I'm afraid whether that's the question that I'm answering or not.
I think regardless, that was a very interesting answer. I enjoyed it. I think we are running out of time. We will be around on Clouder to answer more questions and just hang out and enjoy our conversations there. Thanks everyone for making this event happening, and I really personally enjoyed. I learned a lot from our conversations, and I hope that the younger PhD students also learn from our conversations and go for really be ambitious, go for senior positions, because why not, and do whatever you love. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Venaz.